What's up guys, Raziel here, and today I'm going to be revisiting a video series that was one of my most viewed series of my channel in the past, Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft. Now this is part one of the two-part videos that I will be making, this video will mostly be covering aesthetics, presentation, and of course story, which is a loaded topic in and of itself. But many of you may be wondering why I am revisiting this. Well, Final Fantasy XIV has had quite a successful launch of its latest expansion, Shadowbringers, and World of Warcraft has an expansion coming out later this year called Shadowlands, which is actually looking to possibly be good. But the largest reason I wanted to look into this and do it again was because when my last comparison took place, which was a little over 2 years ago, I had just left World of Warcraft and I had left it in quite a burnt out state. So it's fair to say that I had a lot of resentment build up for the game, having played it pretty consistently over 14 years, and burnout happens in every game. So it kind of was formed from a place of just pure negativity. However, now I currently play both games and I'm emotionally attached to neither one. So I think this two-part series of reviews will be more accurate and less bias, and pretty much as true to my feelings about both games as I can actually get. So both games have a lot of good about them and also a lot of bad, and it goes without saying that this comparison will also bring to light and help us discuss a lot of things that I feel that are wrong with the MMORPG genre in general, which is something that is the primary focus of my channel, MMORPGs. Neither game is perfect, and let's be real, the perfect MMO doesn't exist and will never exist. To many of us, the best MMORPG is the one that we played and fell in love with first. Also keep in mind, many of the topics I cover are highly subjective, so you may like something I don't like about a game or vice versa, but this is going to be my take. So if you can't handle opinions that differ from your own and want to shitpost in the comments because of it, go for it. But don't forget that nobody gives a shit about your opinions any more than they care about my opinions, so go fuck yourself. And with that intro, let's get started. This is my comparative review of Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft in 2020, Part 1.
I am Raziel.
Now, first we could get into a direct company comparison, Activision Blizzard versus Square Enix. This could be a fucking video all on its own, so I won't go there. Let's just get this one over with quickly, cover some basic, bases here. Both companies have made great games throughout the years, but let's be honest, both companies at this point are AAA companies, and the AAA industry is corrupt to the core. Both companies have made masterpieces in the past, i.e., the 90s to the mid 2000s, but neither company is immune from releasing total flops, cash grabs, or relentlessly fucking up a remake or a re-release of a previous product and tainting their name and their IP while doing so. So let's just move on from this. Both are companies whose bottom line is to make money, so just make sure you don't exchange your money for a product that belongs in the fucking trash can. Okay, now let's get to the first major one on the list, graphics. Now, this is what most people see first when they're judging any game. What does the game look like? The graphics, essentially. Now, this category is highly subjective as different art styles appeal to different people. Let's start with World of Warcraft here. WoW is almost a 16-year-old game at this point, and to Blizzard's credit, they have done a lot to improve upon and keep the visuals updated over the years. In fact, retail WoW looks just as good, if not better, than most MMOs that come out on the market using more modern engines such as Unreal 4 and the soon-to-come-out Unreal Engine 5. Keep in mind that World of Warcraft now also supports DirectX 12 and is using an engine that is at this point almost 20 years old. You can still find objects in the game with lower polygon counts and that have not been updated, as well as pieces of gear that the textures look like complete shit by today's standards, but overall the graphical fidelity of WoW is actually quite good, with the animations and abilities getting quite hefty overhauls over the years several times, and the character models, in my opinion, look great, and even more character model revamps and, tweaks are coming with the expansion Shadowlands and additional character creation features, and more sliders and that type of shit being added as well. WoW has kind of a more cartoony aesthetic, and to be honest, when WoW first came out, I didn't really like it, but it may not appeal to everyone. It didn't appeal to me at first. Now, though, it doesn't really bother me, but I look at World of Warcraft's graphical, appeal as more of a defined version of Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3's visuals, made three-dimensional, essentially. And it does fit perfectly with what kind of every Warcraft title has ever tried to achieve. It stays true to its original aesthetic, which is kind of a cartoon. I don't want to go as far to say whimsical, but it's very unique art. It has a very unique art style that a lot of other MMOs don't have, and it stays true to its roots. Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, is more gritty. It's still kind of a cartoon, but less of a Western cartoon. It's a lot more anime-ish, if that's even a fucking word. It's more like a Japanese anime than it is, an actual representation of real life. But it is far more gritty and real than I would say WoW is. And this too definitely has its own appeal. I've always been a fan of Final Fantasy XIV's beautiful graphics and its aesthetic feel, if that makes sense. Its abilities look beautiful and stunning, and it's definitely has a sense of uniqueness in the genre. It primarily right now supports DirectX 11, and it's hinted that possibly DirectX 12 in the future. Who knows? We'll see. But Final Fantasy XIV, the long and short of it, is a gorgeous fucking game, plain and simple. And just as with WoW, there are some models that have shitty textures, and just as with WoW, there's, if there's too much shit happening on screen at once, the most powerhouse PCs will experience some frame loss. But this is due mostly because the MMORPGs, since their inception, have been CPU bound and not GPU bound. Once MMOs start to utilize more cores and threads on your CPU, we should see less bottlenecking on your GPU. Yeah, that is kind of the case for all MMOs at this point in time. And here's hoping that changes, but it may be a ways out. Now, to sum up graphics on these two different games, I can't assign a score to both of these, as both Blizzard and Square keep updating their engines over the years to keep the graphical fidelity, as close to the bleeding edge in the genre as they can. In this is kind of a case of pick what appeals to you. Some may like World of Warcraft's graphics better. Some may like Final Fantasy XIV graphics better. It just depends on, what you are really looking for and what appeals to you as an individual gamer. Me personally, I love both. Both games look great and both run great on my PC at 1440p max settings. And so it's really going to come down to which art style is more appealing to you. There are times that I felt Final Fantasy XIV had better graphics, and there's times I felt World of Warcraft had, a more appealing graphics aesthetic. But and don't worry for people out there. Both games have very highly detailed graphical races you can choose, even ones specifically designed for degenerates, as you can see here. Good stuff.
That's really fucked up.
All right, next up on the list, music and sound. Now, music can make or break a game, especially in any genre that has RPG in it. And we've come a long way from the MMORPG days of old, where a lot of them just had ambient sound and no tracks at all, like Asheron's Call, kind of built into more snippets of sound in areas, like when you enter a city or leave a city, such as, Dark Age Camelot. But both WoW and Final Fantasy XIV have great memorable tracks, from, Elwyn Forest to the Lich King's theme to Silver Moon in World of Warcraft to, the Dragon Song in Heaven's Word, and the main theme there, and the boss battle music and the regular battle music in Final Fantasy XIV both have masterpieces, as part of their OST. Again, music is something that is highly subjective, but for this one, I'm personally definitely going to have to go and give the win to Final Fantasy XIV. I mean, let's be fucking honest here and look at the stats. Final Fantasy XIV has a Guinness Book of World Records listing for the most original tracks in a video game. Final Fantasy XIV has an absolutely stunning OST, and it sets the tone for its game more than any other MMO that I've ever played, and I've played a fucking lot of them. And while both games have great pieces and tracks that I also don't like, stuff that when I hear it in the game, I'm like, oh, this song's so dumb. But Final Fantasy XIV by far has more music that I love than WoW has ever even come close to. So for this one, Final Fantasy XIV got the win, and it's a well-deserved one for me. All right, next on the list, UI and add-ons. Now, there's no doubt that a game's UI can make or break the experience. A shit UI could turn you off of a game, incredibly fast. Add-ons also play a really heavy role in this for many games in the genre. Luckily, both Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft understood this issue, and though they went about solving the problems of add-ons and UI in completely different directions, and I'm going to explain more as we go on. Let me start with World of Warcraft. WoW has supported add-ons since its release in 2004, and I think it's fair to say that much like Bethesda games, it is the community of add-on developers that have really brought the game into the modern era. While most of WoW's UI is able to be changed within the game itself, via Blizzard's integrated tools, the allowance of add-ons in World of Warcraft has brought the game a very, very long way. In fact, most modern MMORPGs try to model a lot of their in-game features, including Final Fantasy XIV, based off of the add-ons that people made for World of Warcraft back in the day. You can entirely overhaul the look and feel of your UI now in World of Warcraft, its placement, how game feedback is displayed, what it looks like, its color theme, everything. Really, to this point in WoW's lifespan, your only limitation is the imagination of the people who create add-ons. Every player's UI can be customized exactly the way they want it, and you can add additional tools to help you improve your rotation and be, pretty much be less shit during raid encounters and things like that. However, add-ons are a double-edged sword, and Blizzard has had their fair share of banning or breaking add-ons on purpose that completely trivialized, a certain mechanic or two in boss fights, played your character for you. We know this is botting, and, pretty much breaking the game in some way, shape, or form that was unintended by developers, like bouncing between layers of a server or, to farm certain enemies and things like that. It's definitely a slippery slope, and it's a battle that Blizzard will be fighting until WoW closes someday, if it closes someday. God only knows how long this shit's going to last. But Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, is very strict in its add-on allowance, and technically speaking, all add-ons are against the TOS to have running at all while you're playing the game. Though, as long as you aren't bullying other players, some add-ons Square knowingly ignores, turns a blind eye to, such as ACT, the damage meter. But Square's in-game tools for customizing your UI is unparalleled. You can resize and move and adjust how you see fit, however you want, and save layouts for later to use on multiple characters without any need to download an additional add-on or a program of any kind. So as far as I'm concerned, if we're just talking about the UI tools in each game that the developer provides themselves, then Final Fantasy XIV is the clear-cut winner here. But if we add in the functionality that add-ons provide, then WoW is ahead by miles. So it really just depends and really comes down to what kind of experience you prefer and whether or not you like add-ons in your MMORPG experience. Some people believe that things being added to MMORPGs such as damage meters and, boss mods ruin games. Other people disagree. But let's be honest here. At this point in WoW's life, some add-ons are downright mandatory, such as DBM bigwigs, because Blizzard has known that their existence for a long time and has thus designed boss encounters around them. We'll get into more about this when we talk about endgame, but it's really changed the way bosses have been designed. Now, is this good or bad? Who's the clear winner, all things considered? You guys need to decide on your own. I personally prefer having add-ons, World of Warcraft style add-ons to help enhance my experience. But I do agree there's a line. There's a line where you take the fun and skill out of the game because it plays for you essentially and breaks things. And I don't like when add-ons cross into that territory. It's a very gray area, but officially I give this kind of a tie, but it's overall what you prefer. Let's move on to the next one, and it's a big one. Now, I saved this one for last in the first video because this is a big talking point. And we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft head-to-head with story and plot. And I know a lot of you guys in my streams have been talking to me about this one. So let's just get started. They both have stories. They both have huge plots. In my opinion, Final Fantasy XIV's is fantastic, and World of Warcraft's sucks, and I'll tell you why. Okay, WoW right now is trying to play both sides. If you look back at 2004 released version of World of Warcraft, it didn't really have a narrative or a story. It just placed you in the world where Warcraft 1, 2, and 3 took place. You met characters. Like I said before in the past, it's kind of like MMORPG genre 1.5, classic WoW, where it's really, really about just being placed in a world that you're familiar with. You're familiar with the lore, you're familiar with the stories of the past, and you're just shoved into this world. Which WoW had a lot of advantages at its launch, and part of the reason for its success is because of how familiar the world was. Older games like Dark Age Camelot, Asheron's Call, EverQuest didn't have previous titles to draw from that people were familiar with. WoW, the world of Warcraft, the universe of Warcraft, if you will, was already quite beloved and quite large by the time WoW released, which, as I said earlier, is what contributed to a lot of its success. As the game wore on, though, we started to see that World of Warcraft tried to shove or retcon a narrative in. Let's look at Vanilla WoW. Vanilla WoW, there was no real narrative, no big boss that, everyone in the game knew about. Sure, there was the raids, BWL, Molten Core, Encourage was kind of a big event that was a story, but it wasn't really a narrative. It was a big active event, which a lot of people loved, and it's coming soon in WoW Classic, where the entire server has to band together to get this raid unlocked. But I wouldn't consider it storytelling or a narrative. It was just actively living in the world. While, even in Burning Crusade, when we went through the Dark Portal, there was no narrative that took us to make us go in the Dark Portal. We were just explorers and adventurers, and all of a sudden, hey, look, the portal's open. Let's go see what's there. I know what's there. It's where Illidan and Lady Vosh and Kel'Thas, it's where they escaped to, in Warcraft 3. And it's where Warcraft 2's expansion took place. Draenor, let's all go there and just fuck around and see what we can find. It was just an adventure with no real story or plot pointing us in a direction. WoW back then was a culmination of a lot of little stories in the quest lines that didn't have one huge enemy and one huge overarching story. At that point in World of Warcraft, you weren't a hero or a champion. You were just your character trying to make your way in the world. We didn't see the first narrative interjection into World of Warcraft until Wrath of the Lich King, where it's, hey, the Lich King's he's just awoke. We all know who he was from Warcraft 3. He's invading Orgrimmar and Stormwind. We got to go to Northrend and stop him. He was the first time WoW actually had one real huge overarching boss, with the exception of maybe the Sunwell patch at the very end of Burning Crusade's lifespan, which is where we kind of had a boss and a story slowly starting to show up. Kel'Thas ran out of Outland and back to Quel'Thalas, and he's Quel'Thalas, sorry. Excuse me, starting to lose my goddamn voice. And he goes out there, and we had to stop him, but most people didn't view it as a big narrative. Wrath of the Lich King is the first time we had a big narrative in World of Warcraft, and overall, it was good. The narrative in World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King, was good because it was using and expanding upon a story that we already knew a lot about from the other Warcraft games. And so it worked. Blizzard didn't have to make up a bunch of bullshit to retcon anything in. It just finished Arthas's story. And then this is where things really started to go off the rails, as we saw in Cataclysm, mop, wad, one failure after another after another. I would say the next closest Blizzard got to having an acceptable storyline narrative in their campaign was probably Legion. That, again, that's just subjective. That's my opinion. But if you'll notice in the way Blizzard tells stories now in World of Warcraft, there's a lot of retconning going on. You interact with the main characters, but you're absent from all the cutscenes. You know what I mean? They're still the main characters, when in the past, the world was, the main protagonist. Now it's, Thrall, Vol'jin, antagonist Sylvanas, and, Garrosh, and all this shit's going on. And you're constantly being told that you're the hero, you're the champion, but you never get the credit. You never show up in the cutscenes, which, by the way, a lot of the cutscenes are gorgeous in the game, but the storytelling is just flat out bad. Mainly because there's no coherency, there's no cohesion, and this is a big problem that Blizzard's had for a long time. Look at Diablo 3, for example. Most events happen off-screen, and not in the game, and in a fucking book that you have to go purchase separately. And I'm just going to be real here. WoW is creatively bankrupt when it comes to narrative. I mean, they cannot organize a story. I mean, Blizzard cannot organize a story to save their life. I mean, Blizzard couldn't fucking organize a rape in a prison shower at this point, all right?
That's really fucked up.
It's that bad. Like, Blizzard they're not good storytellers. I don't think they have anyone on their team that is a really good storyteller. They just shove shit in there and try to make the rest of the game carry it as a whole. The story is shit, and for the most part, how it's presented to you is shit. Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, has an absolutely fantastic narrative, a great story. I mean, its presentation is fantastic. The cutscenes are wonderful. The voice acting and the dialogue's great. And again, you are the hero and the chosen one, and that's how this narrative is organized. It's been that way since the Foundation up, since it's relaunched with The Realm Reborn. You are the hero, and there is this long narrative, and I mean extra long narrative journey you go on, and it's worth every penny to see the story. The story is fantastic. The music goes along with it great. And you're in all the cutscenes. Your character is clearly described as the hero, and it shows. But here's where I'm going to come with a caveat. One big problem I have with Final Fantasy XIV's storytelling is it feels like you're playing a single-player game instead of an MMORPG. It feels like a single-player narrative designed with co-op. It totally reveals that to you and breaks that when, for example, and this is spoilers here, but like there's certain points in the game where you'll go through to fight a huge boss, and the story building up to fighting this boss is so incredible, it's so good, and then right before the fight starts, it cuts and it says, okay, now you need to find some friends so you can actually do this. You can actually get your team together, and it's like, but you're the hero, and it never talks about your team until it says, hey, but this is a raid, or this is this is a dungeon, whatever. And then all of a sudden you have other heroes of light, but to you, they're not heroes of light. They're just adventurers. Well, you're the hero. Which begs the ultimate question that both of these problems with both of these games brings up. And that is that I feel that game designers, MMORPG designers in the genre, have forgotten one of the main reasons we play MMORPGs in the first place. What their biggest appeal was is that these stories have done just fine. Blizzard's shitty story and Square Enix's amazing story here as single-player games on their own. Another RTS for World of Warcraft story would have been fine, and another, numbered Final Fantasy for Final Fantasy story. They don't feel like they belong in an MMORPG. Is the point I'm trying to make. So, for me anyway, one of the major reasons I got into MMORPGs was not to experience another story, but to make my own story, to be the focal point of my own story. While in WoW, and Final Fantasy XIV, you are doing the story the way Blizzard or Square wants you to see the story. You're the hero. You're the champion of Azeroth. You're the warrior of light. And that's what you're going to do regardless. When back in the old days of MMOs, even in Classic and Burning Crusade, Assurance Call, Dark Age of Camelot, EverQuest, you could be the good guy, you could be the bad guy, you could just not give a shit, not participate at all in any of the storyline content if you didn't want to. While in both of these games now, you're forced through it, whether you want to do it or not, and forced to, your character's forced to take a position on it one way or the other. With one thing that I did find interesting, and again, this is where WoW and Blizzard figure something out great, but then they drop the ball, which is in the latest campaign for Battle for Azeroth. If you're a Horde player, you can choose to either side with Sylvanas or Saurfang, have honor or not. And that's a great idea. It's fantastic. The problem is, your choice makes no difference. The story goes the same way regardless, and as far as I know and can tell from what we've seen in the Shadowlands alpha, what you chose has no effect whatsoever on the next expansion and the story going forward. So this is a big question I want you guys to ask for yourself. Now, obviously in this category for storytelling and presentation of story, Final Fantasy XIV is the clear-cut winner, no questions asked. The story's actually good, it's coherent, you get emotionally invested in it. But I want to go a step further and propose the question to you guys. Does a story like this belong in an MMORPG? Or have developers kind of drifted away from what made MMORPGs great in the first place, which is you were just thrown into an open world and you made your choices and you decided what kind of character you were and what you were going to do with your time in the world. But anyway, guys, that is the end for the first part of my Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft. The next segment, and it'll most likely be the only other segment to this series, where we can compare gameplay, combat, leveling, PvP and PvE, raiding, open world, endgame content, class customization and feel. And that'll be a heavy lifter. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you so much for the support. Keep in mind, I am streaming on Twitch several times a week. I don't have a set schedule. That's by design. I don't want to burn myself out, treating it like a job. But there is my Twitch link on screen now. Please check it out. If you want to come and hang out and say hello and tell me what you think, give me some feedback. Otherwise, just chill with us in our toxic masculinity all night. That's just what we do. But anyway, guys, this has been Raziel. As always, my friends, keep it real.